Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means, Senate Committee on Finance, Joint Subcommittees on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Senator Gokachia. Here. Senator Harris. Here. Senator Wynn.
Here.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Chair Watts.
And I am here. All right, members, today we have just three little budget accounts from our Department of Transportation. So I believe we'll start with the Infrastructure Bank. I know we have folks from the Treasurer's office here, including the Treasurer himself. Director, Treasurer, take it away.
I was just going to do a brief introduction. As stated, we will start off with Tracy Larkin-Thomason, Director for Nevada Department of Transportation. We'll start off with Infrastructure Bank, then move on to Bond Construction and Transportation Administration. So with us, who will be handling the Infrastructure Bank presentation, is Zach Conine, Treasurer for the State of Nevada. With him is Eric Humaris, the Chief Policy Director for the Treasurer, and Jeff Landfelt, also the Senior Deputy for the Treasurer's Department. So, Zach, would you take it away, please?
Good morning, Chair Watts and Harris and members of the Joint Budget Subcommittee. For the record, I am Zach Conine, and I have the pleasure of serving as your Nevada State Treasurer. It's great to be here this morning to present Budget Account 4672 for the Nevada State Infrastructure Bank. In 2021, then Governor Sisolak and I worked to expand the State Infrastructure Bank, which was first approved by the legislature through Assembly Bill 399 of the 2017 session, but never funded. As initially contemplated, the bank was designed to serve as a financing mechanism for transportation and large-scale utility infrastructure projects. With the passage of Senate Bill 430, we expanded the function of the bank to allow it to fund a wide variety of projects, including water and wastewater infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure, recycling and sustainability infrastructure, digital infrastructure, social infrastructure, and other projects related to economic development infrastructure. Additionally, through the 2021 capital improvement program set forth in Assembly Bill 492, the legislature authorized $75 million in general obligation bonds to be used to capitalize the bank to provide loans and other financial assistance to qualified borrowers. We've worked incredibly hard to get the bank up and running over the last year and a half, and before I go into specifics for the bank's budget, that are identical to what's included in Governor Lombardo's recommended budget, I'd like to quickly run through all that we've gotten done to date. On July 1st, 2021, the bank formally commenced its operations pursuant to SB 430 of the 2021 session. On August 16th, 21, the Board of Directors for the bank held its first meeting, where I was elected to serve as chair. Since an executive director had not yet been appointed by then Governor Sisolak, the bank's work continued through the Treasury. Since its first meeting, the Board of Directors has also met 5 additional times to conduct its business on January 5th, 2022, April 11th, 2022, June 15th, August 12th, and October 22nd of last year. After the first meeting of the Board of Directors, the Attorney General's office recommended that the bank proceed through the regulatory process to establish policies by which the bank would process, evaluate, and prioritize loans and other financial assistance. As a result of this guidance, and to incorporate the greatest level of feedback from stakeholders as possible, the board approved an initial 30-day public comment period in compliance with NRS Chapter 233B for the following areas. 1. The establishment of criteria, policies, and guidelines for qualified borrowers from the bank. 2. The financing application for qualified borrowers as set forth in statute. 3. A proposed capital allocation for the $75 million afforded to the bank through the 2021 Capital Improvement Program. Once this public comment period concluded, acting bank staff from the Treasury worked with Legislative Counsel to draft LCB file number R027-22 and continue with the formal regulation process. On March 28th, 2022, staff held the first regulation workshop. Then on April 4th, 2022, staff held a second regulation workshop to prevent a revised version of the feedback of the regulation based on feedback received during the first workshop. In anticipation of the board adopting the proposed regulation on April 11th, 2022, the Legislative Commission conducted an early review of the proposed regulation to ensure statutory compliance at its meeting on April 8th, 2022. The Legislative Commission then approved the regulation, and the board subsequently approved the regulation at the hearing on April 11th. As this regulatory process was underway, our staff was concurrently working on the process for a bond issuance to capitalize the bank as set forth in the 2021 Capital Improvement Program. On March 8th, 2022, the State Board of Finance approved the 2022 State Infrastructure Bank Bond Resolution, which authorized the issuance and sale of 2 series of taxable general obligation bonds for $75 million. Upon receiving approval from the State Board of Finance, and once the regulation for the bank was fully promulgated, the State Treasurer's Office completed the sale of these general obligation bonds on April 27, 2022. The bond sale closed on May 10, 2022. As part of this bond sale, the state of Nevada received its highest credit rating in history at the time from Fitch Ratings, Moody's Investor Services, and S&P Global Ratings. As all major rating agencies have reaffirmed Nevada's stable outlook, which is a direct result of the responsible fiscal management during the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with the state's strong economic recovery. These high credit ratings assigned by the major rating agencies allow the state of Nevada to finance priority infrastructure projects through the bank through low market rates in a rising interest rate and high inflation environment. The bond sale also marked the first time the state of Nevada has ever issued social bonds, as the infrastructure bank seeks to make historic investments in affordable housing and public charter schools using responsible labor and environmental practices. Once this bond sale was completed, the bank then began taking applications for financing on July 7th in the following categories. Up to $40 million to support projects through an infrastructure matching fund that will lever hundreds of millions of dollars into Nevada from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Up to $20 million to support affordable housing projects in partnership with the AFL-CIO's Housing Investment Trust. And up to $15 million to support the development of charter schools in low-income communities. With the Federal Reserve's efforts to raise interest rates over the last year in order to combat inflation, we knew that we needed to issue these bonds as quickly as possible to ensure the state could borrow money at the lowest rates possible. For the bank's bond issuance, we were able to borrow at a true interest cost of about 3%. Since that time, in April of 2022, interest rates are about 1.23 or 123 basis points higher than last year when we priced the bond. If we would have waited to issue the bonds today versus issuing them when we did, the total debt service cost would be about $2.87 million higher if the bonds were issued in the current market. Additionally, the bank has accrued $681,854 in investment interest since we first issued those general obligation bonds, which has helped us recoup the cost of issuance over the last year. On September 7th, 2022, former Governor Sisolak appointed an initial executive director, but with the change of administration, the Treasurer's Office is performing administrative functions for the bank until Governor Lombardo can appoint a new executive director. Getting on to the budget. In the Governor's recommended budget, you can see there is a recommendation for allocating $261,006 for the first year of the upcoming biennium and $264,457 for the second year of the upcoming biennium for the bank. The funds will be paid for, as they were last biennium, out of the Bond Interest and Redemption Fund, which will allow us to continue finding and then hiring 2 staff positions, an executive director and an administrative assistant position. Given that the bank is relatively new and the Lombardo administration still needs to hire these 2 positions, we are not proposing any additional budget enhancements outside of what is included in the Governor's recommended budget, so we can continue to build internally in the Treasury. Thank you for the opportunity to present Budget Account 4672. Happy to answer any questions that any members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Treasurer Conine. We will start questions with Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much, Chair Watts, and good morning. I was wondering what the agency's long-term plan is for funding the statewide infrastructure bank budget.
So during the first bond issuance, the legislation that was passed did not allow for the funding of staff through bond proceeds. Going forward, as the bank starts to make loans and advances and begins to get paid back, the goal is to self-fund the bank through interest and other earnings of the bank so that it becomes kind of a self-sustaining and budget-neutral operating environment. Sorry, Treasurer Conine for the record.
All right, next we'll go to Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Treasurer, for having such a high degree of energy on this very early Friday morning. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, thank you so much for the really great detail about the $75 million that was issued. Can you talk a little bit about the timeline for the agency's plan to allocate those general obligation bond proceeds from that $75 million?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, absolutely. And there's kind of three sections, right? The $15 million in funds for public charter schools in low-income communities, that is moving through a process right now. We had a preliminary award during a board meeting at the end of last year and hope to finalize that in the next few weeks. The $20 million for affordable housing, which is in partnership with the AFL-CIO's Housing Investment Trust. Housing Investment Trust, for anyone who hasn't heard of it in my many times talking about how great it is a mutual fund that actually uses pension dollars to build affordable and workforce housing all around the country. They've been at it for more than 20 years, building billions of dollars worth of projects. And the $20 million that the state is putting in will be matched about 9-to-1 with $180 million worth of pension capital. So again, as the bank was intended to, bringing outside money into the state. We have a number of projects in the pipeline for that, including some that are working through local regulatory process. So we expect that those projects will go out in the next year or so. Throughout the next year. And then the $40 million of infrastructure projects that are made for matching. Specifically, we are working with former Commissioner Lucy in the governor's office, who's working on infrastructure, and others to make sure that we're using those dollars as effectively as possible. You know, one of the historical issues with Nevada infrastructure is that sometimes when the opportunity comes for us to get matching dollars from the feds, you're not currently in session, and so we don't have the sort of budget wherewithal to get a thing done. And the goal of the bank was to fill those gaps. We think it will, and so we look forward to those projects coming out over the timelines of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, some of which are over the next year, some of the next 6 months, some of the next couple of years.
Thank you. Follow-up, Chair? Thank you. I appreciate that sense of clarity that we're still following the federal guidelines. It really just sort of helps me get my head wrapped around what the timeline looks like. I do believe I heard you say in your presentation how the bond proceeds or interest earnings from the bank can be utilized. Can we utilize the general obligation bond proceeds to support the bank's administrative expenses?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, we can't use the proceeds, the money that we received for issuing the bonds for administrative expenses because the statutory construction of the original bond authority didn't allow it. But as we're able to get in interest earnings from those bonds, we issued taxable bonds because we didn't know what the programs would be, and there are very strict rules about tax-exempt bonds that we try not to get afoul of. So we issued taxable bonds, and so those proceeds we're able to use for the interest earnings, we're able to use for administration or to cover the cost of issuance. So basically the cost that it took out of the proceeds to pay for the issuance, the lawyers and the financial advisors and the professionals who help us with bond issuances, those have been paid off by the interest earnings that we've made over the time. We're effectively making more money on the interest earnings than we are paying in debt service.
Thank you. Before we move on, just to get a little bit of clarity on this, Treasurer, so you mentioned that ultimately oh yeah, if you can mute your microphone, we're getting a little feedback right now. Perfect, thank you. So you discussed kind of the long-term plan to fund the bank as we get those loans moving out and we get interest payments coming back in. Going back to the kind of timeline issue, what do you see as the timeline for us to be able to transition to that as a funding source? Because I see, we've got 15 million that it sounds like are hopefully fairly close to moving out, and then we've got other things that are going to kind of go out on an ongoing basis over the next several months to several years. Do you have any indication of when we can look to a transition to self-sufficiency for the bank's administrative and staffing expenses?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, thanks for the question. Our hope would be by the next biennium, when we come back for budget authority, we've reached a level of self-sufficiency. Of course, there's another bill moving its way through the Senate right now, SB 10, that would put an additional $50 million of general fund money into the bank, which wouldn't have the same restrictions against, of course, using proceeds for administrative expenses. The bank, and I think this is important, our primary goal is not to make money off of these loans, right? We're trying to make enough money that the bank continue to be self-sufficient and then make other loans and help other organizations reach their goals, but we're not a profit center, right? And so we are, as we look at these original deals, sort of measuring and weighing those two factors, right? To look for the highest return to the state, which might not necessarily be the highest return to the bank.
Thank you for that. And then my other question is just around the bonds that have been issued so far. Is there any sort of timeline or deadline for us to get those funds out the door?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, I'll ask Jeff Landerfelt, our former Deputy of Debt and our current Deputy of Operations, to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe because they are taxable as opposed to tax exempt, we're not subject to any 3-year rule as far as proceeds being spent. But Jeff?
For the record, Jeff Landerfelt, State Treasurer's Office, that's correct. Because they're taxable, there's no arbitrage concerns.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Noticing that there are some loans that are going to the charter schools for their buildings, is that also available for public schools? Or is it only for traditional public schools, or is it only available for the charter schools?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, thank you for the question. Currently, bank proceeds could be used for the support of public schools. The $15 million that we've specifically set aside for the construction of charter schools in low-income communities is to do two things. One, to fill a funding gap that exists in primarily Title I focused charter schools. It is very hard for schools that are serving an underserved community in order to get capital for capital improvement projects, for buses, for lease refinancing, right, for tenant improvements. The only way that charter schools generally can get funding for those programs is by going out to effectively the private market for a loan. And if you go out to the private market for a loan, you pay more in debt service. You pay more in debt service, you're paying less for the students. And for this specific population of charter school students, we thought it was important for us to lean in. It also has opened up a potential funding opportunity with private philanthropy. We'll be able to match the state money and have it go much farther because other folks are coming in. I will mention in SB 10, the bill that is, like I said, making its way through the legislative process. There is another section specifically for rural school construction. And so the bank is intending to fill holes in our capital stack as a state that exist through no fault of the individuals being involved in them. It is simply harder to raise money from a bond issuance perspective in smaller school districts. It is quasi-impossible to raise money from a bond issuance perspective if you are a one-off or two-off charter school in an underserved community trying to make it work in a strip mall setting, right? And so our intention is to fill those gaps, and that's where that original $15 million into the charter school matching went.
Thank you for that clarification, but just to make sure that the rural schools, there could possibly be a availability for the public school boards to also apply for this, because again, that bond issue that you're speaking of, I've heard from other schools that they're also having that sort of issue. So there is a possible plan to allow for some of our rural school boards, to apply for this as well, or is it again strictly for charter schools?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, thanks for the clarifying question, Assemblywoman. Yes, for rural public schools to apply for this, that is what SB 10 would allow.
Thank you so much, and I would love to be able to have a further conversation about some other needs of our school districts and other items that we've got following, I think, the next week and a half of other conversations, but if possible, I'd love to be able to have a further conversation about our public schools that are non-charter as well, in this way, and who exactly approves these schools if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any additional questions on the State Infrastructure Bank? All right. Sounds like you might also be getting some outreach from Senator Goycochea. I guess before we let you go, I have one more question. So, you mentioned some of the staffing transitions, and it sounds like it's been a pretty monumental task to get all of the regulations and policies put in place to actually set up this new lending entity. And and it sounds like I think we had one staff member at the bank. Now we're in transition. We have the plan to hire two. I guess, is two people going to be enough? Does it seem like we are headed to a place? And I know again that we do have the $15 million that is now in process towards getting moved out the door. But are we on track to be able to have the organizational capacity to get these dollars out the door and manage this and get the bank fully up and running in some of the timelines that you've laid out in your presentation?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, I appreciate the question, right? And I think generally at the state, we all find ourselves under-resourced. But in the case of the bank, given the statutory construction, we have effectively created it as a connective nexus between many departments. We can lean on the Department of Transportation, and they've been a big help along the way. The AG's office has helped us with documentation, and we can bring in outside folks. And then we work in partnership with the federal delegation and GFO and LCB Fiscal and others to provide the resources that we need. And you've got the full weight of the Treasury and our 46 or so folks behind it. So while eventually the bank will need other staff in order to be sort of self-sustaining without input from other departments for the interim, we think we've got the fuel and the team we need. Thanks to a lot of help.
Thank you. All right. With that, thank you very much. We will move on to our NDOT budgets. I know we have, our next budget is bond construction, so I hope somebody from the Treasurer's office sticks around. We might have some questions. We might need to phone a friend at some point. Thank you again, Treasurer, for joining us today. Welcome back to the table, Director. Whenever you're ready, you can begin.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Tracy Larkin-Thomas, and Director for the Nevada Department of Transportation. In Las Vegas, I have the Deputy Director, Jeff LaRue, for operations. To my right, I have Darren Tedford, Deputy Director for Project Delivery. And to my, I guess I've said right, left. I get them mixed up. My left, I have Felicia Denny, who is our guru for financials, but also known as the Assistant Director for Administration. So we will start off with the bond presentation. We are requesting a $50 million fuel revenue index bond and a $100 million highway revenue bond. Anticipated projects for this funding will be the Henderson Interchange, the I-15 wall replacement, and the Neon Phase, or the Las Vegas District 1 Administration Building. Assembly Bill 191 in 2015 allowed fuel tax to be indexed at inflation annually for 10 years if passed by county voters. In November of 2016, Clark County passed Question 5, providing annual increases tied to the inflation index to Clark County fuels. NDOT receives the funds from the part that is indexed to just the state taxes. Collected revenue can only be used for construction, maintenance, transportation improvements, and the repair of street, roads, and highways in Clark County. And revenue will increase annually over the enacted period through 2026. NDOT follows the same insurance policy, 3x rule, for the fuel revenue indexing bonds. If voters do not approve an extension of fuel indexing in November 2026, The indexed amount cannot be reduced until the bonds are paid off. The Nevada Department of Transportation periodically issues special obligation highway revenue bonds to fund highway construction projects in accordance with NRS 408.273. The department also has the capability to refinance existing bonds when interest rates are favorable, reducing future interest payments. These are issued by the State Board of Finance upon approval of the Transportation Board of Directors and in cooperation with the State Treasurer. All bond proceeds and expenditures must be posted to a special NDOT budget account, which requires legislative authorization. NDOT's bond issuance policy states the department will not issue bonds until the pledged motor vehicle taxes are at least 3 times the combined annual debt service for both existing and proposed bonds. NDOT could sell bonds in fiscal years 2024 and 2025 and remain compliant with the department's bond policy with approximately $490 million in unused bonding capacity projected for fiscal year 2025. So on there, the next slide, we're showing the Henderson interchange is what we are proposing to use the bond proceeds for. We are now at 30% design plans and for the design build procurement. And I can go more into actually talking about it, but basically it's a $350 million for the total of the projects. We're planning the $150 million in bond proceeds, $200 million in state and other federal funds. I'd like to announce that just yesterday we did get a $5 million earmark towards the project, so that's $5 million less to find in other proceeds. As for the past projects that we've used for bonds, our Project Neon on the Carson City Freeway, I-580 Winners Ranch to Mount Rose, US 95, I-15 Tropicana, and the I-80 Spaghetti Bowl. And that's the other thing. We do not allow total bond repayment to exceed 30% of anticipated revenue, and that's actually very lean for a state across the nation. That ends our presentation on the bonds, and we'll take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. We will start with Assemblyman Hafen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to see you, Director. Just a little bit more on kind of the funding formula that you guys use to develop a mix between bonds, federal funds, highway funds, property tax, and I think it's the Henderson Interchange project. Could you just kind of explain a little bit further in detail on how you guys develop that funding formula? Thank you.
Felicia Denny for the record. We typically always put a priority on utilizing all federal aid first to try to maximize that funding source. And then we look at highway funds that are available, what our mix of projects is. We look at project readiness, whether it's ready to go. We look at project phasing. For instance, will it cost more to delay a project? Or what type of inflation are we facing so that it would make more sense we could utilize economies of scale and then issue bonds as kind of that filler in order to save money overall. And you'll see soon with the inflation we've been experiencing, bonds are really a very cost-effective way to help us put out our project mix. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and Mr. Chair, if it's okay, just a quick comment. I think I'll speak for all of us when I say we appreciate using the federal dollars first. That's been one of our concerns in other presentations, that we're afraid that we may be losing out on some of the federal dollars. So just want to say thank you for that. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I have a question related to the proposed gas tax holiday. And so we've started to get a little bit of additional clarity. But I'm wondering, can you speak to any known or potential impacts to our bond rating related to the potential approval of the fuel tax holiday?
Tracy Larkin, Director for Nevada Department of Transportation. I'd be lying if I said that a gas tax holiday didn't make me nervous, since we are completely funded by gas tax. and related on there. But working with the governor, we have looked to, we have funding in place through the general fund to back up our bond repayments to make sure so it will not impact existing bonds out there. And we are investigating whether there is any long-term effect on bond ratings.
Thank you for that. Do you have any idea of when we will know if doing a 12-month gas tax holiday will have a negative impact on those bond ratings? Basically, when we'll have a good answer one way or the other?
I apologize, Tracy Larkin, for the record. I do not have a timeline of exactly on that. We are working with other states to see how that has affected any of them who have taken similar holidays. We will say that most of those holidays have been very short. They've been a month, 6 weeks, or just a couple weeks.
All right, well, we'll stay tuned. I think, we are very proud of the strong bond ratings that we have across the board, and any hit to that costs us a significant amount of money in the long term. So please do keep us apprised, because we want to make the best possible decisions while we are in session, and that uncertainty and risk is something that, frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about. Members, are there any additional questions about the bond construction budget account? All right, seeing none, we're on our last budget of the day. Only $900 million per fiscal year. We'll get through this in no time. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Well, we promise to be efficient. Again, Tracy Larkin Thomason, Director for Nevada Department of Transportation. And I'm just going to take a minute to talk a little bit about the Department of Transportation. We're more than just roads. And as someone who's now been with the department for well over 3 decades, I'm exceedingly proud of the people within it and what they have accomplished. So one of the things they do is the direct impact of public safety. And if you have noticed, particularly in these last couple of months, I think it's been exceedingly obvious through the work they've been doing with snow and ice removal, being up early, getting over it. I'm going to show a little bit of some of the effects of that later on in the presentation. But these are guys who are the first ones out, and gals who are the first ones out on projects and incidents out on the roadways. And also just internally making sure that they have the support to accomplish what they're doing out there. We do contribute to Nevada's economy. We brought in last year about over 14,000 job years. We continually going on, and we have a very exceedingly robust program moving forward. We are literally at the point where most of the construction, the contractors are almost at capacity for dealing with our projects. We have an integrated transportation system. We cover all modes or support other modes if it's not direct impact. So transit, air, bike, rail. And the majority, we also have the majority of the federal funding for Nevada rural transit. So that is a pass-through, but we do support rural transit in the rural counties throughout the state. And now I'll just move on to slide 3, where we start to get into the meat of what's going on. The chart on the right shows the highway fund revenues and how much is collected in each area. And this highway fund here, it represents the total, which is used by NDOT, DMV, and DPS. The chart on the left shows what NDOT's portion is of the highway fund, along with the FHWA federal aid. The smaller revenue sources like overdimensional permits, fuel taxes, and others. And please note the general fund authorization, and that is what is being used for the gas fund replacement. Due to the high percentage of federal land in our state, most of the FHWA programs only require 5% match. That is opposed to 20% that's required in most other states. So for every dollar we put in, we get $95 back. There are a few exceptions. There are some areas where we still have the 20-80 match, but predominantly we get a very good bang for our buck with federal dollars. We did the federal aid revenue figures do reflect increased amount due to the passage of the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill, known as Bill. And apparently they liked it so much they named it twice. It's also the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It did bring in approximately another 22% revenue into the state, which was added to our budget last year and will be 2% increase over the next few years. I do want to caution that while we were exceedingly grateful for it, What it did allow us to do is maintain our program. And we'll speak a little bit about how inflation is impacting it overall. But there was about a 22% increase in that vicinity, 22%, and approximately almost wiped out by the same amount in inflation. We do, as shown in the chart above, NDOT does utilize highway user fees, federal aid, and for, like I said, for the 2024 year only, per Governor Lombardo's recommended budget, the general fund authorization to fund approximately 99% of its operation. With the governor's recommended budget, you will see that we replaced $256.9 million of highway funds with general funds to show the governor's gas initiative. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Showing we have 99%. So if you look on the left-hand side, we have 99% in capital improvement funding, personnel, and operating, and 5.5% in equipment, including the Nevada shared radio system. These basically, the pie chart just shows the same amount, just broken down in different ways. So it's just different ways of representing the total, our total expenditures. And that's split by, and then the one on the right side is actually split by organizations. So if there's the capital out there, so it's like 73.3%, where expenditures for operations is 14.4%, which is combined on the other side. And we're very lean. We do show that administrative and support is only 5% of our total budget. Again, very lean for a state agency. And then we're going to go into a little bit more talking about our transportation administration enhancement units. We have 6 of them to go over. Equipment, replacement equipment, new equipment, maintenance of building, grounds, rest areas, fueling systems, and new positions. For replacement equipment, as mentioned before, inflation is affecting us. The cost of equipment has increased by an average of 30%. And the equipment age and condition, the way it affects, and we have many of them literally going back decades, some of the age of the equipment. When that's not working properly, it does create delays just in breakdown and in the efficiency of it. Also, at different times, it is a safety concern. We often bring in backup equipment to cover equipment that is in operation in the field. And currently, only 48% of our fleet is in compliance with maintenance condition. It's a little kind of embarrassing to say that we're almost like number 49 in condition of our fleet across the nation. It's been a long time of, we need to go in. We are moving forward with approximately $20 million in each of the fiscal years is the request. That is significantly higher than we've had in other years, but will be a very good shot in the arm to start to catch up on the areas where we are far behind on. When we talk about new equipment, these include things like testing equipment, large tools like hoist when you're in a garage, those type of things that are above $5,000. And so also computers, and then also we have a ride van with instruments that's used for federal reporting. It drives around the state, collects different data regarding the assets about the state, the width of the highway, striping, guardrail, et cetera, and that is part of our required federal reporting each year. And then we also have an underbridge inspection truck. This is a replacement truck. We keep 2 bridge trucks within the state. By federal law, we are required to inspect every public bridge for every 2 years. So, and the other one is scheduled to go in for its 10-year factory rebuild. So basically, we're replacing one, and then once it's back in place, the other one will go down for its repair, its regular maintenance period. And we also have 5 freeway line sweepers. Our sweepers are unique in they're a bit specialized because we have so much rural area. We actually have extra large tanks put in them to carry the paint so it can cover the long distances in between. A truck-mounted culvert cleaner. If you look around, it's a perfect time to actually understand how important the culvert cleaners are in keeping the water flowing, particularly during storms and the type of belts we're going to have the runoff of. the melting from the snow that we've accumulation. We have the Caterpillar dozer replacement and also survey equipment statewide. And the survey equipment, basically the technology is getting faster than the equipment we have. So we need to update the equipment in order to use the programs that are in place. And for every time that we look at equipment, we look at the cost of what it is for the new equipment, the cost of renting the equipment, and the cost of replacing, renting, and I can't hear them. Sorry. Contracting. Sorry, that just slipped my mind, but thank God I've got really good people on the other side of me. So for not renting the loaders and the culvert cleaners, we are saving $720,000. So in fiscal '24, we're using $14.9 million, and '25, we're asking for $4.2 million to cover those. Then I'm going to move on to E730 and the rest areas. So architecture and maintenance stations. So in maintenance stations around the, whoops, I'm farther ahead than I thought. So in maintenance stations around the state, we have 3 main stations, and we have 3 major substations, and also 55 other stations located geographically around the state to cover each of the areas. Many of these stations are literally over 50 years old and so on, and need very much some updating. Our equipment no longer fits in many of the barns. It needs insulation. Some of them need replacing of where they're located. For instance, like in Lovelock, the equipment needs to park on the street because we do not have room in the yard. It's now in areas that are downtown as opposed to away from other residential areas. And then with regard to our rest areas, most of them are over 33 years old. We are looking to replace 3 of them. In District 1, it's Millers, which is near Tonopah. District 2, it's Trinity, which is where 95 intersects with I-80, a very highly used trucks area parking. And in District 3, out in Bowie. Some of this, we have been working on it for a while. We have had some delays due to some hiring freezes during the pandemic, so we're still moving forward on those. For the maintenance stations, we are looking in 2024 for $53 million, and 2025 for $56 million. For the rest areas in '24, we're looking for $720,000, and in 2025 for $12.5 million. Moving on to the fuel system upgrades. We have, we're adding an additional site at the District 1 yard down there in Vegas off of Washington Street, upgrading it, and that's to comply with environmental air quality requirements. We have been working on fuel upgrade systems replacements for now approximately 10 years. As the fuel system ended, literally the fuel systems around the state ended their life cycle, and then they stopped working. These fuel stations are not only used by NDOT. As a matter of fact, we service about 53 other agencies, but basically all first responders, law enforcement, and when you have emergencies throughout the state, they literally become staging centers. So that's where they come in, they fuel up, et cetera, and move on. So it's extremely important that we keep these things functional. And then also, as we've been working with those things, we'll be starting the next round where after these are compliant now, looking at what kind of alternate fuels we use in the different areas. Particularly, we already have requirements in Clark and Washoe counties, which are in non-attainment areas. So for fiscal year 2024, we're looking for $100,000, and for the same for fiscal year 2025. On new positions, we are asking for 50 new positions. We are looking for them to be, they're in new functions that require more specialized areas. You'll see a predominant number for IT. It's changing the way we're doing business. So we're looking for areas where we have new skill sets required. We are not asking for positions in the areas that we are having trouble filling them throughout the state. Of course, we also need them in some states, such as for the external civil rights. We need additional positions to help us fulfill federal reporting requirements, and some for increased workloads. For 2024, we are looking for $4.3 million, and in 2025, $5.4 million. On the next one, on 12 here, you'll see the breakdown of different positions, so traffic operations. Again, it's a different skill set that's needed as we start getting more into like dynamic message signs, ramp metering. It's just, it's not your transportation assets of your yesterday. External civil rights are mentioned on some, in roadway design, human resources, environmental services, and again, in administrative services. Notable changes, and we'll put there, is an increase in department outsourcing. We have started looking, due to the high vacancy rate, we are looking at pilot programs in sweeping contracts and culvert cleaning contracts. You'll see more information, the breakdowns of what that is, on the additional impact to the budget. And again, we already mentioned, we talked about the point to the equipment budgets because of the lack of compliance of our existing fleet. And we're also, we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the crew augmentation. We do have to augment our crews in order to oversee the contracts that we have out. So we oversee primarily construction augmentation to the oversight, and you'll see that it has more than doubled in the past year. So in contract for maintenance contracts, so we're looking at an existing $4.7 million over the $3.8 million we had in each of the past fiscal years, 2021 to 2023. Again, that is directly due to the maintenance contracts that we will be outsourcing. And we mentioned there was street cleaning, which is $3 million per year, and culvert cleaning, which is $2.5 million a year. We're looking at the inflation part, where the National Highway Construction Cost measures the highway construction inflation at 32% from the third quarter to 21 to the third quarter of 2022. There is a typo on the slide there. The next one is 11.6% from the third quarter was the previous year from 2020 to the third quarter. Also know this is the state calendar year. But as you notice looking over there, you see kind of it going up, but since 2020, you can see that 32%, it's becoming very apparent of where inflation has hit us, actually hit the state. A couple of the examples of those, we call class for striping, and we use glass beads in the striping. That's what gives it the reflectivity. So that cost is in there, and that's up 75%. Equipment is 30% up. Cement and concrete are up 14.3%. And the other issue there is that there has been no cement production added, and the demand is growing. Diesel, they were up 33%, and the labor shortages. So as with every area now, I recognize the DOT is not unique in needing positions and the lack of the workforce, but is definitely affecting what we can deliver. The costs of outsourcing. As you look in here, you can see in 2021, the project management is what has been typical in 2021 and 2022. When we look at these, the 2023 figures and the 2024 figures are estimated expenditures, but I will say that these are based on contracts that are already out and awarded. So these augmentation things are already out, and that's the expected use over there. So a very high cost, so you can look to see that what was like $38.6 million for crew augmentation in 2022 is expected to be about $65 million in 2023 and almost close to $80 million in 2024. Now I want to take a moment because, again, you will be seeing some of the effects of what is going to be happening that has been with this weather. Kind of stumbled over saying that, but I am exceedingly proud of what our crews have delivered, and I want to put a big shout out to the fact that most of these guys are up at 1 in the morning, out on the roads by 2, so they can report back to me at 4 to say what the day is going to be on, and we can report out to others if other delays and things are needed. So these are showing, and this is the southern and the northeastern part, so the parts of these are in Las Vegas, and also we did have snow at Primm, and when the road closed on I-15, and then throughout the eastern part of the state, up through and a lot of you'll see outside in Eureka, we'll talk about that in a second, and Elko, but all the rural areas. On the next one, the weather, the freeze thaw, I really like showing this one with the rock there because it has a truck behind it so you can see the size of it. We have now had 3 rock falls between US 95, between Hawthorne and Schurz, so we do have a geotechnical contract going out soon. We have put out close to $20 million in emergency contracts in the last few weeks. This other one, the other rock slide, is in 208 between Smith Valley and Yerington. This is not, it's nearby, but it's not at the same place where we have a $7 million contract repairing 208 from the previous slide going down. On the next slide, recent flooding events. Now that we have moved into kind of what we think might be the end of winter, fingers crossed. But you're seeing the effect of here. One of the things I want to point out is, it hasn't been just one event. It has been multiple events all over the state. And what it is doing, it's undermining the sides of the roadway, so it's bringing out the fines and undercutting the edges. So it's going to be a lot of multiple repairs. It has pulled out some of the pavement in areas, so there have been a lot of intermittent road closures throughout the state. We have pilot car operations on some roads on 338, which leads down into like the Bridgeport area into California. But that has been exacerbated by working with our partners in California who have 395 closed. They certainly have had their share of issues from the storms too. So after this winter, we are going right into flood abatement, and also we are closely watching how the snow melt goes. There is a lot of snow up on that mountain, so these weathers, we're watching how the temperatures drop, because if it drops fast, that culvert cleaning is going to become really critical. That ends my presentation, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Director. We will start with Assemblyman Hafen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a couple things here. One, I want to thank your crews out plowing the roads for us so we can get here, and then I know back home they're able to keep the pass open so I can get over that hill. So I'm very appreciative of all that they do and all that you guys do. I want to touch on your inflation slide because there was a couple things that I found alarming. I know that most prices have gone up 20-30%, but the glass striping's up. You're saying is up 75%, which was very alarming. And then you said under the cement and the concrete that we're not seeing any new cement production, even though the demand is growing. Could you elaborate on why that is and when we anticipate that changing?
Tracy Larkin, Director for NDOT. I can't really say why there's no more cement production because we don't produce it. I believe it's some of the material, lack of material to get some of it. I want to say like fly ash, different types of mixers or fillers that go in it. I'm afraid that's a little bit outside of my area, but I do know we're having a harder time getting it. And do you want to add anything?
Sure. Darren Tedford, Deputy Director for NDOT. The challenge with any existing cement production plant increasing their capacity is largely environmentally related. The approvals that they have to get to increase their capacity beyond what they have existing, so that's a hindrance. As the director said, the raw materials that go into it are a challenge to get. The cost of the utilities, the power, the electricity, whatever the source of the plant is to run is also a hindrance too with the utility prices.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. Just a little alarming to me seeing some things up 75% and then some of them we don't know because they're not going to be in production.
Tracy Larkin for the record. It's the 75%. Now, glass is not something we use a lot of, but it is used in our beads on there. We did have trouble with striping last year, getting it on several contracts. That seems to have kind of evened out, but we are looking at the glass, and it does increase the cost of striping across the state.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Chair Harris.
Thank you, Chair Watts. Can you just quickly explain what impact would the projected highway fund balance of 64.1 million in fiscal year 2024 have on NDOT's cash flow needs and the state's bond rating? I know we touched on it slightly.
Felicia Denny for the record. That's one set of figures I did not bring with me, but I believe that was probably 64 million above our required minimum balance. Is that correct, Nancy?
No, that was, sorry,
Oh, okay, no, I'm sorry.
FY '24
That
amount.
was, if you look at fiscal year '25, what happened with that balance is we show the whole one shot hitting 1 year. And so the expected cash flow would be smoothed out over the 2 years. And so our balance in the second year is expected to be above our minimum balance. It's just the way that the cash flow is displayed due to a one shot in 2024.
So could you just talk a little bit about how that decision to put it all in 1 year and then smooth it out, will that affect your operation or your cash flow needs in any particular way, or anticipate affect the bond rating because it's going to drop once and then?
The actual cash shouldn't drop that low. It's just the budget authority is depicted in that year. And when you look at the actual cash, it's more smoothed out. And so it shouldn't impact our bond rating or our ability to pay any of our debts or expenditures.
Thank you. I have one more question, please, Chair. Thank you. Have any issues materialized that may alter NDOT's projected unrestricted highway fund balance of 64.1 million at the end of fiscal year 2024? If the answer is no, you can say no.
I said she's a guru, so I keep looking over her to make sure that my answer is correct. Tracy Larkin, and the answer is no.
Thank you. And so just to make sure that we've got this understood, it's essentially a difference between a certain numbers on paper, but what you're saying is that the way that you're actually going to manage the funding for these projects, that we are not at any point going to actually go below the kind of target unrestricted balance that could potentially have a negative impact. So while we see that it dips below in one fiscal year and then comes back above in the next fiscal year, that's more of one type of accounting, and that the actual administration of the funding will ensure that we're not in danger of going below that. Is that correct?
Felicia Denny for the record, yes, that's correct. It's accounting for a one-shot all in 2024 that will be expended over the biennium.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I was just wondering if you could share with us a little bit about the factors that you considered in determining the projects that you anticipate would be funded and completed in the 23-25 biennium with the recommendations included in the executive budget. How did you go about choosing?
Darren Tedford, Deputy Director for the department. Thank you for the question. We have an extensive process that we follow for prioritizing our projects of all sizes. We have many projects that we call major projects, up and above 25 million, towards a number that has $1 billion after it, all the way down to safety and ADA projects with preservation projects in the middle, passing lane projects in the middle, excuse me, and we have a process that we call the One Nevada Plan that looks at our needs statewide, the needs of the communities, small and large, and addresses those priorities the best way that we can, spread the money around the best way that we can with our limited funding, and address the most important needs in the most important locations based on safety, based on preservation, based on taking care of what we have.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and it's good to see you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Appreciate you talking a little bit about that One Nevada plan, because I have a question about the projects. I've been in touch with your office for a couple of years, and I have been wondering about 160 Blue Diamond going westbound from Rainbow towards Prump. And I think I will speak for my colleague from 36. We've been concerned about that not being widened in the traffic flow in that area. So could you give me an update on where that project may be? Because I'm a little disappointed it's not in these projects. It'll be completed in the next biennium, so I'm looking farther out. So an update would be wonderful. Thank you.
Happy to do so. Darren Tedford, Deputy Director for the record. The section that you talk about is in a stage where we recognize there's needs along a corridor. The department, along with our stakeholders, along with Clark County, RTC, City of Las Vegas, City of Henderson, whichever the municipality might be in an area, we discuss with them the idea that, yes, there's needs there, and then we go out and look at the specifics. So in a corridor study, if you will, is what's underway right now for those two sections, for 159 and for 160. For the past year, we've been talking to the constituents, the stakeholders, outreach, surveys, traffic studies, safety studies. All of that compiles into a conclusion of a corridor study that could be on this route, could be on Mount Rose, could be US 50 and Dayton. We look at a section, look at all the needs that are there. The study concludes with recommendations, which is right about where we are with the particular two state routes that you're asking about. And the next step is to turn those recommendations into projects. And along with the question before about prioritization, you can imagine that a project to go from one end of 160 up and over Mountain Springs, for example, would be $600 or $800 million. And our budget, as the chair referred to, is $900 million a year approximately. So we have to take a study like that, divide it into projects, prioritize those projects based on needs, safety, preservation, widening capacity, and combine them with all of our needs around the state, prioritize them, and start to pick off those projects as quickly as we can with our funding.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. But as you know, that area is growing so fast, your study's already outdated. We've got a new business coming here, complex at Rainbow and Blue Diamond on the southeast corner. There's one at El Capitan. There's new houses that are just north on Buffalo. You can't keep up day to day with it. I just kind of want to put that on the record that that area of the state is just so rapidly growing that what you looked at 6 months ago is not adequate anymore. So I know my residents complain a lot about that traffic, so I appreciate you continuing to look into it. And if I may, I have another question that has nothing to do about this, but it is on this section. Thank you. I was looking at some of your funding and the registration, title, plates, license fees, and that you're getting, we'll say roughly around 135 million from that. Is there any estimate on lost revenue from unregistered cars? I happen to notice a lot of out-of-state plates, especially just dropping off my kids at school. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any idea what that might be.
I do not know from the number that on the registration. That would usually be more DMV would look at that, that amount, that question.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next person, I will follow up a little bit on the funding. So I was wondering if you could touch briefly on, I know that there was an interim working group and a report that came out around highway and transportation funding. And you've mentioned the need to prioritize projects based on the resources. I know during the previous budget on the bonding, it sounds like we do still have some bonding capacity. So if you could just talk to, one, what's kind of the funding need to address the projects, including, sounds like some additional work is going to be needed to repair things that are damaged by rock slides and floods. And then two, specifically on some of the bonding, I think you talked to it a little bit before of some of the decisions that go into to making that, but kind of just explaining we have a lot of needs, so why do we have some bonding capacity essentially that's kind of still on the table for this biennium?
I'm going to start off, and then I'm going to pass it off to the guru to the left. So Tracy Larkin Thomason, Director for Nevada Department of Transportation. One of the things, there is additional funding that we are putting out for the contracts, the emergency contracts going out. With the governor's declaration of emergency for the state, we will be looking at being reimbursed potentially by FEMA funding. And even prior to that, we were working with our federal partners here in the state to look for federal funding before it rose to the threshold of having a declaration put out. With respect to the bondings, that's where I'm going to turn it over to Felicia.
Felicia Denny for the record. So in terms of bonding, as you've seen, we anticipated selling 2 bonds in fiscal year 2024. Of course, when we put together this budget, it was a while ago. And at this point, that's still our plan. We do have additional bonding capacity, but given some of the emergencies and things that we're seeing, if we determine it would be advantageous and we had project timing such that it would make sense to issue bonds in 2025, we could certainly approach the Interim Finance Committee to do so.
Again, Tracy Larkin, for the record, and to answer some of the questions about AWG, to address that part, is that obviously there were many potential solutions put forward. We are concerned about the long-term sustainability of the highway fund on there. One of the ones we are closely looking at is also just the rate of electric vehicles and alternative vehicles in the fleet. And while we strongly support it, they don't support the highway fund. So we're looking at whether opportunities or things that what could potentially be used, and looking at proposing a framework for that. This is in basically a working group study, looking around with the state. There is no solution or determination identified as of yet.
Thank you for that. And I know that gains in fleet efficiency have had a major impact overall, including in internal combustion engine vehicles, as well as inflation and fuel revenue indexing at the state and county levels is a bit of a mixed bag at this point. And then I did see, just going back to your revenue, we also have the GST, and I believe that's currently 25%, I think, of that is of GST is being directed to the general fund. So that's about $20-something million per fiscal year, it looks like, that was it at one point intended for the highway fund but is going to the general fund. Is that correct?
Tracy Larkin, yes, that is correct.
Thank you. So we'll definitely keep an eye on some of these issues because we need to make sure that we have the resources to take care of the project needs that have been brought up by some of my colleagues. With that, we'll move on to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I think all of us feel especially appreciative of our highway guys, or the people that have been so efficient in getting rid of all the snow so we could get here. Well, sometimes. But thank you all for all the work that you guys have done. My question has to do with the unclassified pilot position that is currently being proposed. I've actually got 2 questions, so I'll just give them both to you at the same time. How would a new unclassified pilot position improve the agency's flight operations? And then how many openings do you currently have? So do you believe that you'll be able to hire somebody for that?
Thank you for the question, Darren Tedford, Deputy Director. The current setup in our flight operations is we have 4 pilots, 1 chief pilot, 2 pilot 3s, if you will, and a pilot 2. The addition of the pilot 2 would allow us to more reliably fly the planes in terms of our pilots are required to have a pilot and a co-pilot now. I say now, but starting about 10 years ago, that requirement to fly into Las Vegas was to have 2 pilots. So 2 planes, 2 pilots each should be enough, but with the normal case where we'd like to not cancel anybody's flight, we'd like to have that additional position. And then to the second part of your question, right now, one of the pilot 3 positions is vacant. One of the other pilot 3 position, we just managed to hire a new team member, starts on the 17th of next month. Our chief pilot position is filled, and our single pilot 2 position is filled now. So technically, we have 2 vacancies out of what would be 5 if that position was approved.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you so much for that. And then kind of staying with the hiring area, you're also speaking about, there's a new product management approach, it sounds like, with some of the background information that we're receiving that has to do with managing NDOT's IT system. And so there'll be nine new IT positions. Could you discuss that a little bit more? And again, do you believe you'll be able to hire those 9 new positions?
Thank you also for that question, Darren Tedford, Deputy Director. As the Director spoke briefly about, the face of a Department of Transportation is completely changing. We have so many databases, so many systems. If you've ever visited or seen the freeway and surface transportation system in Las Vegas, the FAST Center, it's a war room, right? It's a central command for everything traffic that happens in Las Vegas. Everybody sits at a computer. Everybody is referencing amazing databases for what's there. The system of automated traffic management gantries that are over 95 and over I-15 are programmed to respond to traffic incidents. It's hugely based on data, hugely based on the backs of IT positions, and that's important for not only that reason. We've gone to electronic asset management, where we're looking at, as also was discussed, pavement condition all over the state, bridge condition all over the state, hydraulics being our slopes, also our culverts. Everything's in a database that can be tracked, can be analyzed, can be anticipated to need repair or replacement. All of that's database, all of that's on the back of our IT team that we'd like to expand. And to the second part of your question, we hope to be as competitive as possible in hiring those team members. Salaries is a big part of that, but also the flexibility. We do still have a good pension, an excellent pension, but we also try to offer some flexibility for those team members to work the number of hours that we need, but when and where we have some flexibility also, that's something we can offer. So we do hope to be competitive in filling those positions, and we have been relatively successful. Thank you.
Thank you. And so one last question. What is your current vacancy rate in that? Because it sounds like these are essential workers.
Tracy Larkin for the record. I'm going to speak generally to the vacancy rate in the department. Certainly with the positions we put forward, we are looking, like as Darren said, we do hope to be competitive there, and there's some areas where we are. But the majority, we have 26% vacancy rate across the department. In our field areas, particularly where we are hard hit, between 40 and 75% vacancies across the state. And those plow drivers I was talking about, most of them have not had a day off since, well, I should say up to 3 days off since Thanksgiving, and working on shifts. And while we monitor closely for safety, the hours they work, they are working extraordinary amounts of overtime simply to cover. We do have some plows out there we do not have drivers for on there, so they work long shifts and on there. We are very concerned about that. We are also very concerned about some of the support systems. In accounting, we have one accountant. We literally have one person in payroll. And many times we can bring people in, we can't retain them. So I'm getting more concerned about the amount of reaching a point where we just stop because we don't have the people to literally do the support functions.
May I have a follow-up on that? I'll make it really quick. You've got one person for payroll for the entire department? Or did I misunderstand that?
You did not misunderstand that. That is correct. We are looking to fill, we have other positions, and we are looking to fill them and train them. But we have
Thank you.
one active person working right now.
That person needs a big old gold star and a whole bunch of other help. So thank you so much. Thank you, Chair, for that.
We
time.
deliver chocolate with every request.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Senator Goicoechea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've got a couple of questions. And first and foremost, you tell your people thank you. I live in northeastern Nevada. It's been nearly 5 months we've had snow on the ground. I know people complain, and I didn't see a plow, but bottom line is they've done a yeoman's job out there in northeastern Nevada, and well, all across the state, coming back and forth. I can figure clear till I get it about Frenchman's, and then I can lock it down. So again, tell you and your crew thank you. I'm going to get just a couple of questions on E730, and that's nearly the $100 million you're going to put in over the next 2 years into upgrading your maintenance stations. And I'm assuming you are reaching out as you do your tours into the rural communities, meeting with the county commissioners there. I agree with you. We've got some maintenance stations, especially the one you said, Lovelock. Elk was another one that's right downtown. The land values there probably are almost enough to pay to build a new station if it was out on the West End interchange or someplace like that. So I guess I just want to make sure you are working with those local governments, counties at that point as you do your short-term, long-term planning with them. I know you do it, but is that discussion coming up with them? How about relocating? Maybe you can buy this facility from us?
It's not only, Tracy Larkin for the record, it's not only come up with them, it has been happening for a number of years going back. And many times we we want to work with our partners out there and determine what's best, not only for our operations out there, but for their operations. And in some cases, like in Lovelock, there have been discussions over the year where, like, if we move out, there may be room for other operations within town to take over the facilities they have where it might be more appropriate or adequate for them.
Yes, I appreciate that. And just to the committee, like in Elko, they would love to see that imploded and off. It's on I-40 right downtown, right in the middle of the malls. But it has a convention center on one side, a school on the other. So it truly does have some value there. And it's been a long debate whether we're going to go east, west, or wherever to move that. But I appreciate that. I'll get back to the real questions. Please discuss the factors that contributed to the delay in the design and improvements on your rest facilities, especially Trinity and of course, I know what Biwawi is, and Miller's definitely has a need, but what factors contributed to the delay? We thought we had that funded 3 years ago? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Darren Tedford, Deputy Director. For the record, the challenge of personnel, first of all, we have an architecture division. They work under a delegation from State Public Works, and they are working on repairs, fixes, additions, or replacements for over 1,000 buildings that NDOT owns and maintains. And 1,000 is a big number. That's from one of our huts that we have fiber conduit, power, fiber optic all over the state, to our biggest rest areas and maintenance stations. So we have the responsibility for 1,000 buildings. We also have the responsibility to budget, have the time, have the staff, and come to the legislature for approval, first for design in a biennium, and then secondary in the next biennium for money for construction for any particular facility that we're working on. And so that's all in our budget that we've submitted. You heard a little bit about the numbers of what we're asking for in this particular biennium. Really the challenge of addressing the needs of so many buildings that are so old. And when the director said the age of some of our buildings, it might have sounded like she said 15, but she said 50 years old or more. And so those challenges are enormous, and we're trying to pick them off one at a time. Additionally, when we are looking at replacing rest areas or maintenance, I spoke a little bit about our challenges with environmental clearance. It also applies to anything that we want to do with a building, and we end up with rest areas in places where they should be, not in a town where there's local utilities, but in remote areas. So having wells, having water, having power, and being able to upgrade to the necessary needs or the needs of the new facility is also a challenge. But largely the design and capacity of our team to attack these. And so recently in the last year, we've added consultant help. You saw a slide about augmentation and extra expense that we're using to accomplish more of the things that we need to. We've augmented our architecture group with additional consultant architects to be able to pick off these projects more. That's why you see these larger numbers than you've seen in the past for spending on rest areas, because we've increased our capacity to chase after those needs.
I thank you, and I'm just going to touch on that again a little bit. I know Miller's not so much of a water issue. Trinity clearly was a big issue as far as where you're going to get potable water. I am kind of surprised to see, the 16 million at Biwawi, although we haven't done any work on that facility since I was a kid, and that's been a long time ago. Are you going to get those online? And, we're looking at a significant investment, but do you think you're going to bring Miller's Trinity and Biwawi in? You're going to get them completed this cycle?
Tracy Larkin for the record. That is our goal and aim. Trinity is long overdue, and it's one of the busiest, actually, ones across I-80 and in the state. I think one's in design. So we're looking at probably getting them complete by 2026.
26. That's when you think you'll have them wrapped up. All right, very good. And again, Trinity to Biwawi is a couple hundred miles. It lets those truckers get off. It's a huge safety as much as anything else. And then the one we've got at Button Point is only westbound side. So all those things have impact. So I really appreciate what you're doing. Again, mostly thank your crews for getting those white highways black. Thank you.
Tracy, we will definitely pass on your comments to them.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have questions relative to the upgrade for the fueling system. The 2015 legislature, right, approved upgrades to the fueling system. We had budgets. We're in 23 right now. We're projecting additional increases to the fuel system upgrades, right? I understand there have been a number of changes. So I'm just curious, can you talk to the factors that contributed to the project costing more than what was originally projected?
Thank you for the question, Deputy Director Darren Tedford, for the record. Yes, the implementation, the upgrade of the fuel stations was always intended to be a years-long process because of the ability or the availability of contractors to do the work. Also, the downtime that a fuel station being down, we have to have an alternate. So we didn't ever want to try to do all of them at the same time. But then over the course of an estimate and a budget from 2015, even with our attempts at estimating inflation, just the costs of anything to do with fuel, the labor force that is a very specialized contractor to have to complete those repairs and upgrades, it's just compounding what we've experienced. And so with the ongoing process that we planned, the budget has increased because of those reasons.
Tracy Larkin in addition to that, you also have as you come in, you also sometimes find additional issues associated throughout there, so we replace different tanks. So some of the projects have actually grown. And to Darren's point is, as you move forward, some of it was built on a cyclic because what we found is they all kind of failed at once and started to fail. So you get down, this station is down and you have to send either fuel trucks out or send them to other areas. So part of it is having sequential so that when it ends at the end of their life cycle, it will also be sequential and it's not going to hit everybody at once.
Thank you. Follow-up, Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate the detail and the complexity of what's happening. I also like the plan for the life cycle, right? Smart thinking. Can you talk a little bit about how the agency will address potential additional increases in the cost of the fueling system upgrade? We're going to anticipate this out through the next biennium, the next period of time. I can imagine we'll probably have additional increases or other expenses, do you have a plan to address the potential additional increases?
Tracy Larkin for the record. It's always a plan. I mean, basically, when we go in, we always expect some level of inflation. What we have seen recently is over and above anticipated. And I mentioned before, we were very fortunate in having the IIJA bill passed because that maintained it. And we'll have some increases over the next couple of years. But with that in mind, we do look at our projects and we will adjust as necessary. So while we put in, we base it on the anticipated revenue funding coming in, knowing that if it does not come in, some of those projects will drop off.
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up, also kind of in reference to some of the questions that Senator Goycochea brought about the rest stations. Are staffing issues another thing that's affecting both the timelines and the costs for this project as they are with the rest stations? Because, I mean, in both of these cases, there's some similarities of difficulties in hitting the timelines, significant increases in the costs, and I understand that inflation is part of that. But, you know, you mentioned that also workload, staffing issues, and I know you mentioned this was always going to be a phased multi-year project, but it looks like in 2015, we talked about a 4-year project. In 2019, we talked about it being done in 2022. In 2021, we talked about it being done in 2024, and now we're in 23 talking about it being done in 2027. So it's gone from a 4-year project proposed in 2015, and the current end date is 12 years after that. So I was just wondering if you could particularly speak to any impacts that staffing has had on some of these cost and timeline overruns.
Tracy Larkin, Director for Nevada Department of Transportation. Yes, staffing has had it. When it first started, looking back in there, there was, of the personnel available, 2 of the lead people working in architecture moved on to other opportunities. That was a big impact there, so looking to augment the staff to actually finish out the designs and move forward. And also, and this I'm going to have to rely on my trusty partners here. During COVID, I was just not with the department at the time. During COVID, there was a hiring freeze. So they were not able to fill those positions and move on. So we are now looking at augmenting the staff. We've augmented the staff to the tune of about $1.6 million so far to have people help us actually put out the projects across the state.
Thank you for that. Next, we'll go to Senator Wynn.
Thank you, Chair. You kind of already answered this, but just to further clarify with this, the IT system enhancements, do you anticipate any further enhancements beyond the 23-25 biennium? I'm assuming that this is a constant thing that you're having to upgrade and have enhancements, but if you could confirm.
Tracy Larkin for the record. Yes, always. So as we move on, basically just in this realm, as we start to increase what we call digital infrastructure, it's the infrastructure put in place to have the data go through. Darren also mentioned before how we have all the electronic collection in the field for asset monitoring on there. That's just more coming in, and a lot of the programs to actually monitor the efficiencies of the systems, the actual operations, such as the Fast Center and so on, when they come in, that's all based on this type of skill set. And so as the technology advances, the need to have people to address that will advance.
Thank you. Okay, I have one question on E710, the replacement equipment. You mentioned, you have on your slide, 48% of NDOT's fleet is in compliance with maintenance criteria, so less than half. If we rank about 49th in the nation. And you mentioned these investments help us start to catch up. Where will these investments leave us? Maybe the ranking among the states is a hard one, but how much of our fleet is going to be in compliance with maintenance criteria after we make the investments in this decision unit?
I don't know if, Tracy Larkin for the record, I can't give you an actual percentage on that, although I can get some more information back to you. What it does is, going back several years when we had the recession, there was 6 or 7 years where we did not get any equipment at all. We just flatlined it. Prior to that, we had been getting $10 million a year prior to the recession. At that point, we started doing $5 million a year. This has recently gone up a little bit higher, and that's why the 20% is a really big shot in the arm of getting it. We have some things that are replacements of going back to 1972 for some of the large equipment. I can't answer the exact percentage, I guess, basically, but it will bring a good portion of it up to speed. We did a special thing about 4 years ago. Again, it was a very bad winter. We had snow plows, and we spent like $1.2 million per snow plow to get them up to speed so you actually have clear roads this year. And again, I guess I'm fumbling on that one. I don't know the answer.
No problem. I think that'd just be something that I'm interested in, perhaps some other members of the committee would be interested in as well. Again, I know that there, across many different agencies, there's significant investments in deferred maintenance and in some of these deferred items. And so I just want to make sure in a lot of some of the capital improvements and upgrades for facilities, we're trying really hard to clear the kind of the backlog, and just based on some of the context that's here, I understand that this is a big boost. I want to know, is this going to get us where we need to be? So you can follow up with that, some information that shows us, based on this investment, roughly, and I understand that there's probably some different factors in there, but roughly where we're going to be at the end of the biennium with this investment.
If I could add, Chair Watts, Darren Tedford, Deputy Director, for the record, that 20 million, it's a 0.4 and it's a 0.4, but it is specific equipment that we have an estimate for and that we would intend to purchase upon approval. And we have the list of all of our equipment. So it's a number we can get for you that 48% of compliance. You can imagine that a loader or a snowplow has a different maintenance criteria than our utility trucks that our crews use to drive around, but each of them does have maintenance criteria where we can say it's meeting or it's not meeting. And so we can get you a number, and that I just wanted to add that those 20 millions right there is obviously a huge chunk of equipment, but it's a very specific list that we put together based on priorities and based on what equipment is not meeting that 48%. So we will follow up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We want to make sure that everyone is safe and that our equipment's efficient and effective. So last question that I have, first of all, I just want to reiterate a lot of the thank yous that have come from a lot of my colleagues on the joint committees. I want to thank everybody in the department, from the director all the way down to the field crews, because with the information that we have here, you all collectively are shouldering the work for 400 plus people who aren't there because of vacancies. And that's an incredible amount of work. And given some of the things we've heard about how thinly stretched some of these departments and positions are, the fact that you are all keeping the ship afloat and doing all the work that needs to be done is incredible, and particularly for the field crews who have dealt with this incredibly record-setting winter. So thank you for that. What I want to touch on a little bit around that is, you've mentioned repeatedly some of the struggles with staffing, the higher costs of outsourcing, and I guess at a high level, I want to know, how do we fix this? How do we get those vacancies down? How do we make sure that we've got enough folks in doing architecture, doing accounting, doing our highway maintenance? Has there been I know that there's some proposals that will hopefully help, but again, we've seen the cost of living go up, and really I think those the proposed cost of living adjustments kind of help us stay steady, and where we're at right now doesn't sound like it's very sustainable. So have you done any studies of salary to see where NDOT compares with other competitors that folks might be leaving the state for? And, you know, I'm just, it sounds like also a lot of this outsourcing, we're going to have to invest these funds and spend extra money because of where we're at right now. And there's not really a way around that at this point in time. But I want to find out, how do we make the investments to avoid having to pay even more money in doing this exact same thing down the road?
Tracy Larkin Thomason, NDOT, for the record. There have been some studies done. The 2022 DHRM salary study is just released about a week or two ago. And it does show that state workers, and depending on which area you're in, are 30 to 52% less than other public agencies in salaries. We did an NDOT analysis, and I know Darren can talk more about it. He did it last year and presented on it. We're showing 42% in the study that we did, which is consistent with what we found. And to be blunt, it's compensation that is driving people away. We bring in people for like CDLs. We train them in about 6 months. Many of them are gone in 9 months because once they have their CDL license, we've become a very good training ground. So I give a lot of credit to the guys for that. Along in some other areas is once they have the skill set and bringing on, we're grateful for having them all the time we have them, but it's flat out, it's compensation.
Thank you for that. And again, I know that there are also difficulties in the revenue source with highway funding and some of the issues that have been discussed previously. But I would like to get some additional information again, and I would love to see that study, and particularly some of these things that are causing huge timeline and cost overruns. Our architects, making sure that we get more than one person in accounting so that we can actually get the bills paid and all the invoices handled, and then particularly our maintenance workers and those field folks who are busting their tails to make sure that our roads are operating. To me, I would just like to say that, to me, those are priorities that we need to make the investments in, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's going to save us in the next biennium from having to invest millions of dollars to try and pull some contract workers in just so that we can get the work done. So if you could follow up with some of that information for us to consider, I'd really appreciate it. Members, any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again so much for your time and for your presentation today. All right, members, that brings us to the last item on our agenda for today, which is public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment, we'd ask to limit their remarks to 2 minutes. To please clearly state and spell your name before beginning. If you'd like to make public comment by phone, you can find the call-in information on our agendas, which are publicly posted, including on the Nevada Legislature's website. So with that, we will open it up for public comment, both here in Carson City, down in Las Vegas. Seeing nobody coming forward at this time. Broadcast Production Services, do we have anyone wishing to make public comment by phone?
Chair, the line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
All right. Thank you all very much. That concludes our business for today. We're adjourned.